And that's why I believe in you, because that is the greatest purpose. It's to love. Honest. It sounds corny, whatever you want to say. I don't care. I love people because there is freedom and power in loving people.
Hello, all you positive heads out there. Thanks for tuning your beautiful brainwaves into another episode of the Positive Head Podcast, where we have the crazy belief that creating success and happiness is a daily conscious effort, which is why we provide you with a fresh serving of soul food for thought 5 days a week. I'm your host, Brandon Beecham, and each and every Wednesday, you can tune in to hear me interview a different consciousness changemaker that is out there working tirelessly to help catalyze change and expand awareness all across Spaceship Earth. On the other 4 weekdays, you can tune in to myself and my co-host, Dalian, giving interpretations of our favorite thought-provoking quotes, sharing a bit of inspiring or mysterious news, taking questions from the audience, and digging into any other mind-expansive topics that will help keep your soul fed by tuning you into positive vibrations on a regular basis. And you guys have heard me say that if I ever run ads on the show, it will only be with a company that I fully support because I believe their intention is to make a positive difference in the world. Well, I'm pleased to announce that day has arrived and that this episode of the Positive Head Podcast is being brought to you thanks to the support of Gaia. If you're not familiar, Gaia is the go-to source for streaming consciousness content online. And you can sign up for your first month for only 99 cents at gaia.com/positivehead. That's spelled GAIA.com/positivehead. Check it out. All right, all you positive heads, on this week's interview episode, I am very happy to have Maria Teresa Chavez here with me on the show. Maria is an intuitive energy worker, spiritual coach, and transformational healing and retreat organizer. Hello there, Maria. Welcome to the show.
Hi, so nice to be here. Thank you for having me.
So glad to have you. We've been talking about connecting for quite some time, and I'm actually fortunate enough to have you here in the studio. Oftentimes it's remote, people are all over the place, and you happen to be coming through my neck of the woods. And so you're gracious enough to bless me with your presence. So it's extra good.
Thank you. It's such an honor to be here in your home studio, which is so zen and amazing and yummy smelling.
It is. We do have some essential oil like stuff going here, but that's just to mask some of the man muskiness that goes on in here. So
I appreciate it.
For those of you that don't know, my garage is convert. I'm sure I've talked about it at some point, but it's converted into studio space, and it's definitely eclectic and fun. So I'm glad you're appreciating it, Maria. So to jump right in, I always start and end with the same question. The question I start with: you're in an elevator. Guy next to you looks over, says, "What's your passion?" You have 10 floors to answer. What do you say?
My passion is reminding people who they truly are. It's all about activating people to their internal power and just knowing how completely unlimited they are and how much we all are able to really affect each other in like the smallest moments and the most beautiful, sweet smiles and eye contact. And you can really help a stranger or your neighbor in every moment of the day. And that, to me, is changing the world little by little.
I love that. Mm-hmm. And you made such good eye contact the whole time you said that.
Thank you, man in the elevator.
So where to begin? You do a lot of interesting things. So I'm going to try and squeeze it all in here. Now, as far as intuitive energy work, I find that just in itself very interesting. I know there's so much different type of energy work. What exactly does that entail? What kind of energy work? What type of you offer coaching? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I definitely have made, as many people have, a really beautiful blend of all the different modalities that I've learned over the last 12 years. But again, a lot of what I do is working with people with their core wounds and trauma release. And the word trauma can be a little interesting sometimes because people think, well, does that mean I had something like, a massive attack or something that happened that is like a really distinct trauma? But a lot of us have just picked up smaller traumas throughout our lives, and we have these stories that we're running from, if it's like, or not running from, but running, that's our program that we're running.
Right.
And so I can usually just upon meeting and talking to somebody, find out where are they blocked, really can tune into if something happened when they were younger, and really just through conversation more than anything, start to pick up and get really down to the root of what is it that's blocking somebody from being their fullest expression.
Wow.
And so that's kind of where I use the word intuitive, where I can usually feel if it's something in really early childhood, is it something that happened even, when they were in the womb or whatnot, and just through conversation, being able to kind of tease out what those things are, and then help people have some pretty profound transformations, again, through conversation and through different types of energy work, where I either have my hands on you or, we're really just anchoring in a new story, essentially, to reprogram that old one that's no longer serving.
That's wonderful. Yeah, that's something that we talk about all the time on the show. What story are we telling? And so rarely do people realize it's these things, even that have happened in the first, 6 years of life, that really have this impact. And it can be these events that you don't even recognize. And it's so powerful to start uncovering that. And what an incredible gift to be able to, use your intuition to kind of probe and get an idea. Are people often surprised at what you come up with or come out with that maybe they didn't expect you to know?
Yeah, again, my brand of intuitive work isn't quite like, the word psychic's always really interesting. I wouldn't be able to say
Very
that I can,
word.
Yeah, I wouldn't be able to say that I look at you and I see like the exact moment that something happened, but I can just have a very strong sense around something, essentially, and by asking a few pointed questions, we can get down right to the root of it. And that does surprise people, that it's like, holy moly, this person's asked me 2 questions and I've already just had a big realization that I didn't even know that the fact that X happened when I was 6 really is affecting me still to this moment.
Yeah. Very, very interesting. And so Sacred Earth Warriors, that is your company, correct? And this is where you offer different different approaches to helping to heal and work through, traumas and whatnot. Can you tell us a little bit about if someone were to come to you, say, I want to do work with you, I want, spiritual coaching or, some sort of healing work, what would that look like?
Yeah. So, I do a lot of one-on-one work with people, but what I realized as one of the deepest issues, if there is one in the world right now, is this lack of connection. So I talk often about this lack of connection to self, lack of connection to each other, and lack of connection to the earth. And so then the inverse of that is, how do we create more connection to self, to each other, and to the earth? And so these Sacred Earth Warrior retreats are just a beautiful opportunity to unplug, get off your cell phone, get off your computer, be really present. We do them in these beautiful locations, Native American land, and just lots of nature, camping on the earth. And in the mornings we meditate and we do yoga together, and we do kind of martial arts and really get into our bodies, because I find that being strong in your physical body is really important. And then in the afternoons, usually when it gets hotter out and things like that, we do a lot of lectures and workshops where you learn about theta healing and you learn about reprogramming your own languaging and a lot more things around conscious relating and those type of things. And then at nighttime, we do a lot of celebration. So we do drum circles and cacao ceremonies, and we dance and we play, and we have a lot of song circles and acoustic music. And these events are all completely, substance-free. So no alcohol, no mind-altering anything. Because actually the whole point, as we'll talk about later, is that I do take groups down to do plant medicine in Central and South America. And I think of those as tools. And those are just tools of remembrance. And then what do we do the other how many weeks of the year? How do we really integrate that and anchor it?
Right.
So what I find a lot is that people are having these really profound opening experiences, but then they don't cultivate their practices to get strong enough in their physical, spiritual, mental bodies to actually anchor and hold that new vibration.
Right.
So these retreats are all about supporting people to really create those containers within themselves and in their communities to really be that new person of that higher vibration and all those things that we talk about.
Wow. Very interesting. So yeah, integration, it sounds like is important a piece as the, having some sort of a transformational or profound experience is the integrating piece.
It is so important. And if there's anything that I focus on the most, it's the preparation and the integration. And I think that that's what I offer that is a little different than a lot of people that are, doing, and not everybody. There are a lot of amazing people doing a lot of prep work and integration work, but I think the conversation is not as prevalent of a conversation as it is, when people are like, oh, let's do ayahuasca and let's do these other things, they're usually talking about the peak experience of the actual night.
Right.
And the conversation around the preparation and the integration is just not as sexy and glamorous and fun,
right.
But I'm like, let's have that.
It's like before and after you're on stage. Like no one knows talks about the band that's in the rehearsal studios, like sweating it out forever. It's just like those moments of glory on the stage, right?
Exactly. And that's what we call them practices, know, in the spiritual tradition, you call your spiritual practices for a reason because you have to practice them and you have to do them.
It's not a spiritual perfect.
Exactly.
I love that. So you talk about self-healing and healing generational pain, which I think, once again, is something that I'm always circling on the show is, self-love being the number one thing we're all sort of here to do. Can you speak on that for a little bit?
Absolutely. Well, again, at the end of the day, I find that the term healer, for example, a lot of people call me a healer, and I think that's a beautiful term, and I definitely use it. But again, the conversation around everybody being their own healer is something I'm much more interested in.
Yeah.
So again, everything that I do is not to tie people that they have to work with me or that I hold keys that they don't have access to.
Right.
My whole purpose is actually to remind, activate, empower people, inspire them to become their own healer, to become their own doctor, and those type of things, to really know yourself better than anybody, knows you. And at the end of the day, that's an obvious thing. Like nobody will ever know the internal terrain of your mind or your body the way that you do. But it takes you, again, connecting and really being able to be quiet enough, to be present enough, and to listen really well to what you need.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, if everybody took that greater care of themselves, then we wouldn't need to be healing each other, right? We would just everybody would be taking care of themselves.
Right.
And that is my ultimate goal, is that eventually everybody on the planet has all these tools in their own toolbox and they can just use them on themselves. And I find that, the conversation of generational and ancestral healing is so important because we don't even know that we're oftentimes carrying down these things from generation to generation.
Yeah.
A lot of people do, and it is a conversation a lot more people are having. But a lot of people feel like, I just came out of the womb and holy moly.
I'm fresh. They have no idea there's energetic ties, DNA ties, that's, it's encoded a lot of these experiences that have happened to ancestors. And
exactly. Yeah. And that's so heavy if you think I just came out of the womb and I'm just super fucked up. Right. That's a lot of pressure.
Totally.
And actually, it's usually patterns that are passed down, and a lot of things that we do have a lot of control over. And so the moment that one of us in our family lineage takes a stand and says no more to something, then we are truly, I work a lot with the Native American traditions and that energy of the next 7 generations. We're really passing down a whole new, again, story, if we want to call that, or a whole new world, a whole new culture, whole new everything to the next 7 generations if we stand up and say no more and do the work that we need to do to kind of clear the slate and truly allow the next ones to come through with a little less baggage on their shoulders.
Right. Yeah, I can't help but think of, I saw a post earlier today online, and a lot of times, you see posts where people will get kind of going back and forth about what's right and wrong, and I rarely get baited into that. But I saw this post, and it was it was showing a clip from a TV show or something where this kid called, he called the police on his mother for spanking him with a belt. And then the policeman showed up and kind of talked to the kid, took him aside, and then, sort of like condoned it, like, get back in, kid, you deserved it kind of thing. And the whole post was like, there's a difference between spanking and abuse, and like, this is okay. And I'm thinking to myself, instantly, it just brings up all these feelings of, my dad had a very violent, father. His father was the same to him. My dad spanked me. It was probably less than what he experienced. And for me, I have a son, and I've never spanked him in my life. And he's now in high school, and so I just couldn't help but think, when you talked about breaking the cycles of, and I was really shocked to see how many people were like, yeah, bravo, this is right. You should spank your kid. It's not abuse. And I'm thinking, I finally had to chime in. I'm just like, for me, I was spanked, and I don't believe in teaching to solve problems through violence. And, everyone's entitled to their own opinion, but it was just kind of surprising to me. And of course, I thought about it at the time, and this is just a couple hours ago. I was like, well, wow, I guess that's something where I really broke the chain. And I hadn't really thought of it that much. It just, instantly was my perspective of, there's no way I'm going to use violence and teach him this is a method to solve issues. But I suppose there's a lot of that going on, or it seems like there's so much of that, even with our generation, between us and our parents, it's such a big gap in perspective. And I just feel like, that kind of thing, I was talking about it with someone, and they were like, yeah, 20 years from now, that will be looked at as just really far out there that we ever even thought it was okay, but we still do, and it's just, there's so much of that sort of thing.
Absolutely. I do see that our generation, we have, again, made such massive leaps and bounds. Mm-hmm. And in a lot of ways, it takes, I talk again about this a lot, it takes courage and it takes bravery to be the one to say something different than our families, may believe, or that our communities, because again, often, for example, if you're from a Latin family, you're around a lot of other Latin families. And so if you're the one to really say something completely different, oftentimes you are looked at as being a little bit of an outcast.
I'm sure you've had a little of that in your story.
A lot of that.
Yeah, I also think, when you talked about self-healing and so forth, it definitely really resonates with me because, I think of, you hear of, spiritual teachers, or even people now like John of God, for example, I'm sure you've heard of, or, you think of people like Jesus who are famous for healing, and I'm certainly no expert, but my personal feeling is that what those characters are doing is really suspending disbelief long enough for you to heal yourself. They're kind of creating this container in which you believe it is possible, and therefore you're ultimately doing it to yourself. And so that really rings true with me, as opposed to, kind of the idea of a guru or something always has sat kind of funny with me. And I know with a lot of people. And then you have others who are like, no, this is a really valid way to kind of find yourself. And who am I to ultimately say it isn't right for someone? For me personally, it's always about, how do I empower myself, and how do I, empower you? I mean, I say on the show all the time, look, I may have some great things to put out there to you guys, but at the end of the day, I'm like, you teach best what you most need to learn. And I'm doing this for me because I need it. And if it benefits you, great. And so, yeah, that definitely rings very true with me. Like, here, we're going to empower you. And I think that is such a key piece to avoid that kind of like spiritual narcissism that can be so prevalent.
100%. And even when we're talking about, healing the body, because I do, we may talk about this later, but I work with nutrition and things and herbs to help people heal their bodies. And even that, what we're doing is we're essentially, first and foremost, removing the stress and the toxicity from the system. And then we're nourishing the system really well, simply so that the system can then heal itself.
Right.
Because at the end of the day, the only thing that ever heals your body is your own immune system.
Right.
The things that we're using are really powerful to boost the immune system and to support and make sure you have the vitamins and the minerals you need. But at the end of the day, all that's healing your body is your own, little worker bees in your immune system.
Right.
And so it's that same principle that we can create a really beautiful and safe container for you to heal within. But I do first and foremost call myself a space holder more than anything.
Yeah.
Because I feel my first job is to make sure that you feel fully safe to express whatever you need to express, release whatever you need to release, talk about whatever you need to talk about, have those emotional releases and those realizations and those downloads. But yeah, that's all coming through you. And I'm just saying just what enough, to really aid you in that process. But I always make sure that my sessions, it's not about me, it's about you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that is true wisdom when someone sort of approaches it from how do I, empower you, and it becomes not so much about, putting myself on a pedestal. And I think that's a slippery slope for a lot of people as they come into their own power too. You start realizing, I realize now I'm one with all things and source and God and the physical, essentially a goddess, right? And it's that kind of, I think one person comes to mind in my life where it's just like they slipped completely off of into the most narcissistic thing ever. And it's just, I guess everyone has their own unique, path to understanding, and it becomes more about how can I serve, right? Well, you touched on something that I'm interested to get your opinion on, because it's a very hot topic nowadays, of course, nutrition. And I know that's something, as a nutritional consultant, that's one of the many talents and hats that you wear. What is your thoughts on sort of, you hear this ongoing sort of back and forth about veganism, and eating animals, and what is your overall take on that personally?
So I, first and foremost, it's really important to me to not get into what I would consider dogma, which is essentially a blanket that works for everybody, right? A one size fits all that says everyone should do all of these things.
Yep.
And my whole journey is about, well, first and foremost, just to actually tell you a little bit about my backstory, is that I used to suffer from some very severe eating disorders, was very depressed, had very severe anxiety.
Wow. And that's hard to imagine because you have such a calm, Zen demeanor at this time, but obviously you've probably done a lot of work to get there, right?
Thank you. Yes, that's exactly where I am now. And the way that I got here was using all these modalities that I teach. And so first and foremost, I started doing all these things just to heal myself.
Yeah.
It wasn't as a career anything. It was just to literally save my own life.
Right.
So the download that I had when I was about 17 years old and was going through all of these things and just really didn't know which way was up was that the moment that I turned food from being my enemy into being my medicine, that I would heal myself.
Yeah.
And
beautiful.
so that download that I received was really about using plants. So at that time, I needed to go into like a clean slate. So I really did go down that route of a lot of raw foods, a lot of salads and smoothies and juices. And in that moment, I needed that kind of detox and that returning to a clean returning to nature, returning to whole foods and things like that. So I went down a path of veganism for about 7 years, I would say, was vegetarian for about 12 years, and just really was listening to my body at every step of the way as to like what was right for me. And so again, that's what I teach people. It's like you need to tune into your body and know what your body needs.
Yeah.
I do think as a culture, the more plant-based we can go, the better. For,
ecological.
Yes. I mean, I am such an environmentalist and an activist in that way. Sustainability is really important to me. So when we're having those conversations, I do feel like the majority of people are eating in very unsustainable ways for the planet and in very cruel ways for the planet, for how the animals are treated and all of that.
Right.
And again, I believe that if we are sourcing things in a very responsible way, then, we all do need different things in our diets. That's just the reality. If you do want to get into blood types and things, different people just need different things.
Yeah.
So I find that eating some organic eggs, eating a little bit, when I say a little bit again, because most people are way off in terms of proportion and portions, but eating small amounts of 100% grass-fed, organic bison or beef, those things can be really supportive. Having a little bit of wild-caught salmon and those type of things, I think of those as additives. As long as the foundation of your diet is a lot of plants, then you add in the things that you personally need. But I definitely believe that the majority of people need a few of those extras in their diets. And that, again, as long as we're sourcing them in really responsible, moral, sustainable ways, then that's just a completely normal part of being a human.
Interesting. Yeah. For me, I've been a big meat eater my whole life. Up until maybe 2 years ago, I started trying to cut it out. And at this point, I guess you could say I'm pescatarian for the most part. But one of the things that kind of struck me is after I did ayahuasca, it happened to another friend of mine as well, where it kind of like was less enjoyable to eat it. And I'd stopped even a little bit before then. But even after that, I noticed it kind of bothered me more. And one of the things that I always kind of think of is, of course, you see these horrible videos and things that happen to some of these animals. And, of course, everything being vibration, what they're taking on in those moments. And so, yeah, I think that's a key point. If you are doing it, if you are eating, it certainly doesn't need to be, it's being overdone by most people in a way that's really hazardous to their health, at least, studies show and a lot of the sort of evidence shows. And it just needs to make sure that whatever you're ingesting has not been like really mistreated and because there is so much of that out there, and of course you're taking on that vibration. If there's been a lot of fear and awful environment and, you're then ingesting that and,
Absolutely. And I recommend a lot that people go to farmers markets. I think farmers markets are the best way because you're right there speaking to the farmer, checking in personally with how everything's being done. You can even go visit the farms and things like that. So at the end of the day, as long as you feel really good about what you're doing and you feel in alignment, then you're good.
Absolutely.
Go for that. Just when people are eating things and they're feeling bad about them, that is actually when a lot of the toxicity.
Yeah. If you're going to do it with, the right attitude and do it with, the right. I had a friend recently who was before every meal will really concentrate on the food and saying thanks to, what anyone who's been in the line of that particular meal ending up on their plate. And I thought that was really, really nice, thinking of the farmers or whoever was involved anywhere in the chain from where it, from the animal itself or the plant or the, however it ended up there, whoever shipped it, and kind of like saying a blessing to all of those characters. I thought it was a really, really interesting and profound sort of simple but profound approach to, showing gratitude and bringing the right energy to the process of eating, right? Well, now seems like a good moment to take a quick minute to tell those of you who aren't familiar a bit about our sponsor, Gaia. I've been a big fan of Gaia for many years now, which is why they're the only content provider I've ever reached out to in regards to potentially supporting this podcast. So, needless to say, I'm very excited they're now supporting the show. Gaia truly is my personal go-to source for streaming consciousness content on the web. They have an incredible 7,000 plus exclusive videos covering 5,000 years of wisdom. Just to give you an example, on the show Missing Links, the incredible researcher Greg Braden explores all the biggest questions concerning who we are, where we come from, where we're going, by connecting the missing links between science and spirituality to complete our understanding of humanity's history and to better understand the interconnectedness of all things. Awesome, right? And that's just one example. As you guys constantly hear me say, it's a daily conscious effort to maintain an elevated vibration. And if you're looking to go deep down the rabbit hole to do so, then Gaia is the best place I know of to do it, period. And you can sign up for your first month for only 99 cents at gaia.com/positivehead. That's spelled GAIA.com/positivehead. Check it out. So you actually work with a lot of plant medicines, and of course, I'm always very interested in that, and have had many people on the show to discuss that topic. And one of which we had a cool little synchronicity. We always have a synchronicity story on the show, and we had one live and direct here where I was asking you about, you actually, I kind of remembered you worked with, had seen something about you working with Martin Palenko and the Crossroads team down in Mexico, who I interviewed. Martin, as well as a few others, Dan and Oh, what was her name?
Deanne.
Yes, Deanne. It's been a while ago. And we were just talking about it a little bit. And I was even asking you about the pronunciation of his name. And lo and behold, right as I'm talking about him, he calls you on the cell phone.
Yeah, that's perfect.
So that was really cool. So we have our own live synchronicity story here today. But let's talk a little bit about your experience with Iboga and plant medicines and, share anything that you feel like will be exciting to hear about, because I'm always so interested in the people that are doing the work, that are on the front lines, because it's such amazing work that's being done in that world.
Yeah, it's really deep. It's really deep work. It's pretty much the deepest work, I think, in a lot of ways. The plant medicines they're in my blood. My father's Peruvian, my mom's Venezuelan. So in South America, there's a rich culture.
Peruvian food, I got to say, is some of the best food.
So
on the planet.
good.
So good. If you haven't had Peruvian food, go find a Peruvian restaurant somewhere. If you have to drive an hour, drive an hour.
I totally agree. My father is one of the best cooks on the planet.
It's so good.
The food is so amazing. But yeah, the culture in South America is really rich. And there are a lot of plant medicines that come from the Amazon, and a lot of the animal medicines, actually. And they're just some of the most powerful tools I have ever found. Truly, they are, and I use that word tools very specifically because they're tools. They're not something to be used all the time. But that being said, they can open your eyes to things that you just never even knew existed or knew were possible.
Right.
So I personally have had some of the most transcendent, empowering spiritual experiences of my life utilizing these medicines. And so, again, the work that I do is all about helping people to heal on the deepest levels. And oftentimes, having experiences with these medicines catalyzes that growth by 100-fold.
Yeah.
And I'm looking for the most effective, the deepest, the most direct ways to get to that healing, because we don't have time.
Right.
to mess around.
Exactly.
We're on a massive trajectory here as human beings.
Absolutely.
And we've got to really just kind of get in there.
The train is moving and picking up speed. Yeah.
Absolutely. But it's work. These medicines are work. They're not, a fun recreational, just like drop in one night.
Like going out to the bar kind of
not
experience.
At all. Yeah. They are deep, deep work. They are not always fun, oftentimes messy, oftentimes just difficult, because ultimately they just have you face your own shit.
Yeah.
They have you really take a deep, deep, deep look in the mirror and see what is not working, see what's blocking you, see where you have been avoiding or procrastinating or neglecting or in denial. Very oftentimes we look at things that we're like, OMG, I have been totally fooling myself.
Right.
That isn't a problem, or that thing that I do isn't massively, having a detrimental effect on my life.
Yeah.
And so it's just, it's not, you can't get away from it. When you do plant medicines, everything's just right in your face.
Yeah.
And again, thank goodness, because once we are aware of it, then we have some power to change it.
Yeah. You recently took a group down to do Iboga, correct? And you're working on a documentary that is working with veterans. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah. So again, we have a few different, I'm always working on multiple projects, but one of my passions is working with the veterans because they are it's such a neglected group in my mind where, we take these young people who are so excited and so passionate and so loyal to their country to go and, in their minds are really defending us and standing up for our rights. And again, me being a citizen of the world, I don't necessarily hold those same views, but I see their passion and that they're really coming from such a good place. They go, they give, so many years of their lives. Many of them are not even present for their children's births and are just so deeply, deeply programmed in detrimental ways. And then they come back and they just get dropped and they literally just end up so lost and on so many medications. And the suicide rate for the veterans is literally through
astronomical,
the roof.
right?
It's, I mean, there's a lot of different numbers, but it's somewhere between 22 and 60 a day are committing suicide. And to me, that is just not okay.
Yeah.
So we are working at Crossroads. Crossroads, we also work a lot with opiate addictions. And so a lot of people who are addicted to heroin and painkillers. But we also have started to work with veterans. And so we are working on a documentary called Soldiers of the Vine, which follows 6 veterans who went down to Peru and did, really deep into the Amazon, did the full plant dietas, sat with ayahuasca, I want to say about 3 times. And then they came to us at Crossroads and they went through an Iboga treatment. They used the 5-MeO DMT. All of them are cannabis activists as well. So this is really a conversation around healing war trauma with plant medicines, which is just such an amazing conversation to be having. So I'm really honored and grateful to be a part of that documentary and of that movement to really support the veterans, as well as I love to, support the people. I don't like to use the word addicts. I like to use, we talk about people experiencing addiction, essentially, because I do feel like it's something we can really heal from. And, so the Iboga, to me, ibogaine is an alkaloid extract from the Iboga plant, which comes from Africa. And I use the analogy that ibogaine is to Iboga as vitamin C is to an orange. So if you're sick, you're going to extract the vitamin C and compound it and take mass amounts of vitamin C. So for people who are really experiencing, for example, a lot of trauma or opiate addiction, we really need to get in there and flood the brain with that specific alkaloid so that we can hit the receptor sites and really have the resetting of the brain that needs to happen. And then for the rest of us who are really just wanting to have spiritual growth and expansion, we can take the straight root bark, which has about 12, different active alkaloids in it. So it's, again, more about eating that entire orange and getting the fiber and all the different compounds. And so I'm also working with a center in Costa Rica called Iboga Wellness and taking down groups down to Costa Rica to work with the straight root bark. So they go to Africa. They have all been initiated in the Bwiti tradition in Africa, which is one of the most intense things you could ever do, is to get initiated in Africa. They feed you about 20 to 30 times the root bark we would ever take.
Really?
And you're out in the middle of the bush and they're, dancing and singing and smacking you with reeds, and there's bugs, and it's really intense. These facilitators have such a deep connection to the African bush, essentially like the terrain and the jungle out there. And so they go in. You must have some
deep roots, at a soul level to go and do that. It's the instant thing that comes to my mind,
So deep. It's something that I definitely see in my path, and it's something that you're going to do OMG, we've got to work up to that, though. I think in like a year time, some of them have said that it took them a whole year to integrate after, to be normal after coming back from Africa, a year. Wow. That's a massive commitment. But again, that connection that they've cultivated by doing that is like nothing I've ever seen. And it's why going down to the center is so important to me, is because I see the container that they hold. Again, they go and they harvest from the bush in a very sustainable way. They go and just take a couple of the roots. They don't take the whole plant out of the ground. They leave the plant. They take a couple roots at a time. They literally just dry and shave, the bark, and you consume it that way. They spoon it into your mouth. It's like sawdust. Wow. It's just straight 34-year-old aged African Iboga root bark. And you do it outside. They have these beautiful beds that are outside in the jungle, and you've got birds and, beautiful butterflies and things coming in the morning. And the monkeys are in the trees with you, and they're playing the traditional African music. And it's a really, really, really profound. It's probably the ultimate step that I took in my spiritual growth and my working with the plant medicines. We call it the Mount Everest, and it's definitely like the big kahuna, father-grandfather energy of the plant medicines. Okay, so let me get this straight. You've already went to Africa, or you're going to go? No. I haven't gone to Africa yet, but going to the center in Costa Rica that are all the African initiated. I see. No, I haven't gone to Africa yet. It's sort of like the step before the step. Exactly. Very interesting. Yeah, I have not...
experienced Iboga, and it seems to be even a little bit more intimidating than ayahuasca from what I've heard. I've heard it referred to as sort of grandfather and grandmother, ayahuasca being the more feminine energy and Iboga being the more masculine. Would you say that's a fair assessment?
Absolutely. Iboga is very masculine. It's very direct. Whereas ayahuasca is very feminine. It's very flowy. It takes you on a lot of different tangents and the best way I could use this, a very flowy way. Whereas Iboga is direct and it puts your body into what we call an ectastic state. So your body essentially goes into a healing coma and you can't really move your body. So there's no getting away. You are laying there for
really?
an entire
I
night.
didn't know that.
So you're just laying. The great thing about it, though, is that there is a little bit of a psychological construct that is created where you're really watching a lot of these things that are happening. They're coming on almost like a screen that's on your mind's eye kind of thing. A lot of people even call it like it looks like a television screen or a movie screen.
Very visual.
Very visual for some people, not for everybody. And again, those are actually some of the, I don't want to say myths, but some of my educating points for people who are going to do Iboga is that they come really wanting it to be the most amazingly visual thing ever. But it's not always that way.
Yeah.
And actually in African tradition, they think that it's better if it's not super visual because if you're tuning into your mind's eye, then you are being reconnected with your intuition, which is what they ultimately think is the most powerful thing that the plant medicine can help you do, is to really connect with your soul's voice. So they almost are wanting, that Iboga really heightens all of your senses, and that sense that they would consider listening to your deepest intuition, your deepest soul's voice is more important than seeing a lot of beautiful things. Now, seeing a lot of beautiful things is awesome.
It's beautiful.
It's awesome. It's beautiful.
I never have really been a really visual person when I've done, psychedelics or even ayahuasca. No real major visuals. So I'm curious what it would be like,
Yeah. And it's not always beautiful things. It's also not very beautiful things. Right. It's a lot of, all the plant medicines, I would consider them, and again, this is a broad kind of terminology, but are subconscious purges. Yeah. They're really just showing you what's deep in your subconscious. And there's a lot of interesting things that are in there.
Yeah.
A lot.
Yeah. Some good and some bad, depending. So I thought that was very interesting how you explained the difference between Iboga and Ibogaine. So with Ibogaine, what's really interesting that I learned, talking to Martine and the others was the fact that it actually, for people who have a serious like heroin addiction, for example, it actually cures them essentially in one usage. Is that correct? Like, or close to it? It like does something fundamentally different to the brain?
It is profound. I'm careful of using the word cure.
Yeah, I know that's a very strong word, right?
That is a strong word. But it is absolutely profound. So yeah, I was working in the clinic. I mean, it's been about a year that I have been working really deeply in the clinic. I'm not as much in the clinic now because I'm working on some bigger overarching and just kind of different projects through the company. But the transformations that I witnessed from being down there are just mind-boggling.
Can you share some examples or an example?
Yeah, I mean, essentially just the watching people, the difference of what happens in 1 week. I mean, if you didn't want to use the word magic, it is just like nothing that you could even describe. I mean, people come in, their skin is very, pale and often dry. People look very old from using these, all the pills and all kinds of things. A lot of them are not just using one drug, they're using a mixture of drugs.
Right.
And so they just have a very heaviness to them. They're tired, they're cranky, they are just not stoked on life at all, it's and that's I'm just laughing because I can already, even telling the story, thinking of some of them at the end of the week, they are stoked on life. And it's like, wow, how did that happen in 1 week? That the color's back in their face and they're not having any thoughts of cravings and zero withdrawal symptoms, and all those things. So it's very, very, very profound. But essentially what it's doing is it's clearing the slate. So then you still have to do the work. You still have to really go in and look at a lot of that, what are the habits and the coping mechanisms that we have, all of us have, but that this sector tend to have even more, in terms of really just needing to run away or numb or avoid what the underlying causes are. So in one treatment, we're really just more than anything, it's a physiological cleanse with one treatment of the Ibogaine. So it's physiologically cleansing their body, and it's physiologically kind of resetting the brain, which is so profound.
Yeah.
And then people do need to do their own work after. So we are always cautious of this idea of it as a magic pill, because people think you just come down and do once and that's it, and you go home and never again will you have a problem, and that's not
like no
correct.
big deal. I'll get strung out on heroin. I know I can go down and see Maria, and I'll get
it. Don't do that.
Oh, wow.
But we also use, again, actually just even continuing this conversation at the clinic, we also use another medicine, which is the one I've already touched upon, which is the 5-MeO-DMT.
Now that you extract from frogs as well, right?
Yeah, it's a toad, actually. So there's these big toads that live in the Sonoran Desert. They are underground for about 9 months out of the year.
Wow.
They only come up about 2 or 3 months when it's really rainy, and they come up and, mate and get water and those type of things. And then they go back and they hibernate. So when they're on top of the surface, we can go and find them. And we essentially, we use the terminology milk. You milk just one of the glands. You want to make sure, again, for sustainability reasons and for just moral reasons, you don't want to strip them, because that's their defense mechanism.
Wow.
So if you were to milk both their glands at once, then you leave them defenseless, and we would never want to do that. Our idea is, obviously the purpose, is never to harm the animal. So we take one, they actually really like it, they're really docile, and they just kind of chill in your hand.
Have you went through that process before?
I'm actually next weekend heading down to the desert for the first time myself.
Wow, what a cool experience that will be.
Yes, I have a lot of friends who extract, so I know a lot about the process, but this will be my first time in the desert, in the rain, at night, with a headlamp on, hanging with the toads.
So are you going to extract and partake as well, or will it be just extracting to be used at a later time, or you don't know?
Yeah, it's mainly to extract to use at a later time. I may partake. It's a very beautiful medicine to me. I do, I also, we take groups down to Mexico to work with that medicine as well. And it is a very, very deep medicine to my heart. It is one of the most transcendent, angelic, unifying experiences that a human being can have. They say, obviously, I say they, and whoever they is, and I can't speak from firsthand, but what I intuitively feel to be true is that what happens when we pass away, essentially, is that we leave our bodies and we go towards this beautiful light, and we're just reconnected to the essence of all that is. And so this medicine allows us to experience that before we pass away, which what a gift, to really be able to experience life outside.
It's like a near-death experience in a sense.
Exactly. So we call it a controlled death experience.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Wow.
And so you're able to get outside of the you that you know and experience the oneness. And we all talk about the oneness a lot. And a lot of people know that the oneness is true, but they haven't tangibly experienced it or touched it or been a part of it themselves.
Wow.
And so this medicine can take you to that place. And so, we definitely take groups down to experience that medicine. And I have done it many times. Not that many, meaning that I don't use these medicines every weekend by any means, it's really a few times a year will I do some deep dives with the medicines in a very intentional way. That's
the interesting thing about DMT, right? It's so quick as opposed to maybe Iboga, which is isn't that a very prolonged experience? Ayahuasca is a pretty long experience. With the 5-MeO-DMT, it's there and back, right?
Absolutely, which is another reason why at the clinic, pairing it with the Ibogaine experience is so powerful.
You do them together?
No, not together, but in the same week.
I was about to say, oh my gosh.
No. That's even for us, as the psychonauts that we are, that is a lot.
Yeah, that would be something.
we do, you do the Ibogaine treatment, and then about 3 days later, when you're really kind of back. The Iboga does. It stays in your system for a long time. I mean, when I did 2 flood doses in 1 week, and we did one on a Monday night and one on a Thursday night. And by the time we were going into the second one, I was still feeling the medicine from the first night.
Wow.
So, it's days later that it's still in your system, and it's still in your system for months later. Actually, it actually goes into your fat cells and then kind of off gases, as I like to call it, from your own system for about 3 months as neuroibogaine.
Wow.
But using it about 3 days later after the ibogaine treatment is such a profound experience. Because again, it's complete opposite. The ibogaine is long and it's difficult, especially for those people who've been really abusing their bodies because, as I mentioned, it physically detoxes you really powerfully. So it can be uncomfortable. Think about when you're doing a cleanse of any kind.
Yeah.
You go through that period of you're just releasing all kinds of junk, essentially. So after going through such a long, arduous kind of experience, to then have this really profound, angelic kind of connection to God is such a special, there's a really beautiful symbiosis. Those medicines really love each other, and they work really well close together in that way.
Very interesting. I was just reading an article a few hours before this interview, and it was Rick Strassman. For those of you who aren't familiar, he wrote The Spirit Molecule and, a lot of work in DMT, and sort of brought it to the forefront of the public awareness, 20 years ago or so. And I just read an article how him and someone else were exploring using DMT to create prolonged experiences. Have you read about this or heard about this, where it's like sort of like an anesthesiologist would do, where it's like sort of drip dosing, so it can keep you in that state? What an interesting...
people are doing all kinds of amazing things. I will tell you that it's also fascinating working with people's preconceived notions or kind of stereotypes of who are we that work with these medicines really deeply. And a lot of my peers are doctors and scientists and just some of the most brilliant minds you would ever meet, very successful in whatever they do. And so we're always looking for what are the ways to enhance the healing effects of these things. So there's a lot of ways that you can, give lower dosages over longer periods of time to, extend and really keep people in that field so that they can integrate it even deeper into their cellular memory. Absolutely. So there's all kinds of really, just like anything right now.
So much is going on out there.
Tons of enhancements and improvements always.
That's the whole reason I started doing this podcast. Like, I'm so fascinated by all the amazing things that are going on out there. And it's like, what better way to learn and bring it to other people to learn at the same time and get to connect with so many people doing so many cool things. It's like, I've had people ask me, before, do you have trouble finding guests? Or it's like, no, not at all. There's no shortage. And, I've had some guests, best-selling authors who Oprah's interviewed and, I find people who, you're just as interesting as anyone else I've spoken to. So there's so many amazing people, some who are newly on their path, some who are really well known, some who, actually some of the more well-known ones have been the most difficult to communicate with, I found. So it's an interesting, there's no shortage of amazing people on all levels of sort of success or public, awareness, I guess you would say. And it's just so incredible to tap into, all of it and just kind of dig around and see what's going on. And
I love it. And that's what they say a lot of times in Eastern philosophy, that essentially the longer that you are doing something, the more you know that you have so much to learn.
Yeah.
And so for me, I've been doing a lot of this work for, 12 years. That to me, when I say it, sounds like a long time. But the deeper that I get into it, the more that I know.
The more you realize you don't know, right?
Absolutely. Exponential. And that's what's so fun about it, to be honest.
Absolutely. So I have a question for you. As someone with so much amazing, Zen-tastic, divine feminine energy, do you believe we're moving into an era where feminine energy is becoming more dominant? I'm sure you've heard this sort of, and maybe dominant isn't the right word, but you know what I mean. Do you feel like there is a switch happening in society where
absolutely
the feminine is taking the lead, so to speak?
Yeah, I think that it's a really important and exciting time in the world right now, is that So my father's a scientist, just to tell you, you like stories, but a little story of how I essentially see everything as an experiment. So we try things and we see, are they working or are they not working? So we as a society, as a culture, as a world, have seen for a while now what it looks like to have men really at the forefront and masculinity. I even want to make that differentiation.
Sure.
Because it's not just men, it's the masculinity.
Yeah, because we all have feminine and masculine energy within us. It's in what balance and what...
Absolutely. So the dominance of the masculine energy has not really been working. I mean, we've just seen it so many times that this really singular focused approach to things doesn't really work. And the thing about femininity is, masculine is a very linear, very one-pointed focus. And the feminine energy is very encompassing.
Yeah.
So women need to make sure, and I'm just using this as the example because usually we think of femininity as for females. But if you think about women in the tribal, times, women really need to be able to have eyes on the back of their head, because if babies are running all over the place, you got to tend to the garden and you've got a pot on the stove. And
totally.
You really have to take care of everybody at the same time. And you have to have an awareness of how everything is affecting everything else.
Yeah.
So that, to me, is the energy that we have so been lacking, is the understanding of how everything affects everything else.
Yeah.
And in our society with the Industrial Revolution and everything, we all got really trained to only focus on our one little piece of the puzzle. We're one little cog in the wheel. We don't really need to know what the person above us or the person below us or the people on the side of us are doing.
It doesn't even matter if it does harm them, as long as we're benefiting in the short term.
Exactly. We've been trained to do that. But we see that doesn't work, because we're just using all of our resources and we're not treating each other well, and we just honestly made a mess of things. So the feminine energy, that resurgence of that really empathic, sensitive energy is so important. But again, what I find is that it's not the conversation. A lot of people are talking about the feminine, and a lot of men are feeling like, wait, you're just empowering women. What about us? But no, as you mentioned, the deeper conversation is the rise of the feminine in the men and the women. It's the rise of the feminine in the culture and in just the way of being. So we need both they're both so important. And our own internal feminine and masculine balance is, to me, the most important thing.
Yeah.
So even with the combo, for example, just to jump to another real, quick
to jump to another
medicine.
Frog.
Exactly. So the frog medicine that I work with is called combo. And actually, traditionally, it's compo. It's actually a P-O and like a P. But the white people, we didn't know how to pronounce
we
it.
always dumb it down.
So we call it combo. And it's a frog venom that you have to burn the first layer of skin, and then you apply this frog poison, and your body goes into a really intense physiological reaction. It's essentially cleansing all your organs. It's boosting your immune system. It also has a lot of powerful kind of spiritual effects, even though they're not as obvious, because it's not psychedelic at all. You don't have any visions. You never lose sense of the fact that you're going through this physiological intense purge. But afterwards, synchronicities, I know you love synchronicities, your synchronicities, it essentially helps to align your subconscious and your conscious mind. And so you're just working on a whole different level of magnetism when you're aligned that way.
Wow.
But I just did a combo session last week, and I decided to do it on my right side, where I've done a lot of my medicine work on my left side, or the combo work. And the right side's the masculine. And so just the realization that I am such an uber feminine woman in so many ways. And then in some ways I've neglected my own internal masculine. And I definitely, a lot of people would know me as a very strong woman, but there's still a little more work that I get to do on really integrating the balance of the masculine and the feminine within myself. And I think that that is the healing journey that we're all on, is the rise of the feminine in balance with the masculine as well.
Yeah. Yeah. I had a guest many months ago who is intuitive. And one of the things that she talked about was the masculine and feminine, and how much, in even going back a generation or two generations, it was completely unacceptable for a man to have anything but masculine, energy emanating from them, essentially. And, she made the comment that I have a very good balance of my masculine, a very good, masculine and feminine. And that actually is what helps lead to a lot of, success and ability and things like that. And I think that's something that sometimes people, especially maybe more traditional, individuals are sort of thinking, no, I'm all masculine. And it's like, no, you are, I think of like Tony Robbins, for example, here's this very masculine man, and he talks all the time about how important it is to get in touch with your feminine as well as your masculine. And so I think there's an awareness of that happening. And I've heard it said that, and I find this interesting from sort of a spiritual perspective, that over, as we go through eternity, let's say, or the journey of humanity, it's sort of this, unification and separation from source, right? So we're all one, it's all, unified. Then you have this separation occurring, which is sort of what's happened in human history for as long as recorded history and probably beyond. So during those times of separation from source where we've forgotten who we are, what we are, all those things, it's like the masculine sort of takes over. It's all about like defending and, everything's a threat and a lot of fear and it's all, that world. And when you come to the point where we're at now, where it's sort of, we're all waking up to the understanding and realization that we're supported and love is sort of behind the scenes of all of the whole story, and we're one with all things. It's like now we're moving back into the feminine, which is sort of takes the lead during the unification process, which we've recently entered in. Some would say like, 2012 being a turning point and so forth for feminine energy kind of flooding into our reality. And I think that's an interesting sort of perspective. When there's separation happening, the masculine is dominant. When there's unification happening, there's feminine. And so, yeah, I don't know if you've ever heard it put like that, but I did many years ago, and I thought it was a very interesting kind of perspective on it.
Absolutely. I think that's a great, again, all these ways of using our words and using stories to add more context and understanding to the different waves that we are on as a human species. I mean, we're just going through so many fascinating, evolutionary changes right now.
Totally.
And so it's great to know a little bit of the history and the context of why these things happen the way they do. And it allows us a little more ease into what is happening, because it is a little disconcerting for certain people. It's like, wait a minute, just like anything, when we're moving away from what we know, even if it's not working, it's comfortable.
Right.
And I find that a lot in my healing work, where people want to cling to their bad habits because even though it's not working, it's a comfort zone. It's what they know. And the mystery terrifies people.
Yeah.
And it's one of, again, the things I love to help people move into is this love of the mystery,
of uncertainty,
and this like understanding that that's where the magic lies.
Yeah.
The magic lies in what we don't know. And I feel like it's the reason that we incarnated into human bodies is so that we don't know every second of the day what's going to happen. I always say, like, imagine that you were watching a movie that you knew every single second of what was going to happen. You'd be bored out of your mind.
Right.
So we've all come here to have some variety, to have the uncertainty, to have the mystery, and that's where the magic lies. And how much can we embrace that and love it?
Yeah, one of my favorite teachers, Osho, talks about that, saying, certainty is death. Uncertainty is where all the magic happens. And yeah, in moving into a place of, faith where you're going to be supported. I'm walking off this cliff and maybe I'm going to sprout wings on the way down, I don't know where I'm going to land, but I believe absolutely 100% that's where all the magic happens. And so many people get comfortable and scared and fearful, and I'm going to stay in this place of security, which is really a great big fat illusion to begin with. Like, you are not secure if you think you're secure, so you might as well move fully into embracing insecurity and letting life flow from that point.
Absolutely. And that's another thing that the plant medicines will do, is that they support people to just shake up every part of their life.
Right.
And that is what a lot of people know about me and the way I live my life, is that I'm always changing things.
Yeah.
Always. Even if something's working, I still want to tweak it and refine it and upgrade it and shift it a little bit.
Right.
Because it's just who we are. We're such dynamic, ever evolving, ever changing beings.
Yeah.
And we need to live our lives accordingly.
Don't get caught up holding on to something that you were yesterday necessarily. Yeah, cool. So I got a question for you. I always go to, and that is, do you have a story of synchronicity, a personal story of synchronicity or serendipity, or a positive paranormal story that you would care to share?
Again, it's so cute because you asked me this earlier just to like plant the seed. And my response was, I can't even think of one because I have so many.
My whole life is that.
I know that's boring, but it's kind of a long story. But essentially, when I first heard of combo, I thought it sounded horrible. You essentially get burned, you get poisoned, and then you puke your life away. And you may have diarrhea, you may pass out. It's like, who wants to do that? So when I first heard of it, I heard of all the benefits, but it just didn't sound very appealing to me. But then like a month later, I'm in Hawaii. It was really hard to find practitioners at this time. And so I heard that they were, this group was going to do a retreat in Arizona. So I decided for my birthday that I was going to fly myself to Arizona. Well, but on the way, I found out that a friend's mom wanted to go as well, and she was in Los Angeles. So I flew from Kauai actually, to LA to pick her up and then drive her. And then we drove back, and I was going to fly back from LA to Kauai. And on the way, it was the day of my birthday, and ended up posting on Facebook that I was having essentially a birthday dinner at Cafe Gratitude, and I'm just invited whoever, essentially saying, hey, I don't know that many people in LA, but I know I have a lot of Facebook friends in LA. So I'm going to be at Cafe Gratitude in Venice at 7 p.m. Whoever wants to come.
Cool. What a great idea.
Right? So I walk in the door, and sitting at the counter is my future partner, and just like the first person waiting for me. And it was just such an immediate connection. But at the time I still felt like, okay, but he lives in LA, I live in Kauai, it's not going to work. Yeah. We'll just enjoy each other. I go to do the medicine, I come back, and I end up getting hired to fly to the Big Island to film a conservation video with his best friend's girlfriend. Her name's Hannah Mermaid, very famous professional mermaid.
Right. And I think I've met her before, actually.
So then she invited me to move in with her in LA. And her boyfriend and my future partner were business partners and best friends. And I ended up living in her house and introduced to all these people. And so that's just one long story.
Yeah, that's a great example. So he just showed up, and you were just friends online, but didn't really know each other well or anything?
No, we had sent a couple messages back and forth on Facebook, but it was, he just obviously as well felt the call to show up to some random girl's birthday.
Right. That's so great. Yeah, and then it's obvious that there was something very meant there for you two. I mean, what's the chances of you ending up working, or having that connection where, very, very cool.
Very cool.
So what's next for you? When's the next event?
So we have a couple coming up. We're doing another Sacred Earth Warriors, which is, again, the non-medicine, just a lot of practices and modalities and connecting to the land. We're doing one of those retreats October 21st through the 23rd. Mm-hmm. And that's in San Diego in the mountains. It's about an hour outside of downtown San Diego on this beautiful property, 17 acres of sacred Native American land. So that's 3 days at the end of October. And then we're taking the group down, actually essentially 2 groups in November to Iboga Wellness. Mm-hmm. We've got 1 week, the 3rd through the 13th, I want to say, and then 13th through the 20th, or somewhere along those lines. Essentially, it's 8 days each with one day in between. So back to back. Essentially from the 3rd to the 20th, we've got 2 different week-long groups of doing 2 Iboga root bark journeys each. And so that's in November. And then in March, we're doing a Sacred Earth Warriors retreat in Costa Rica. Beautiful. Which is also really exciting because it's right after Envision. So after you have the big play fun of doing this Envision festival, then you can really get deep and connect with the land. And, we're still, that one, I'm still toying with a lot of the components. We may do an ayahuasca ceremony because we're in Costa Rica, and that's totally, A-okay there. And
right.
So we may be doing some plant medicines. That would actually be the first Sacred Earth Warriors that we're doing internationally. So we may incorporate some of the plant medicines within that.
Excellent. Well, and if people are interested in attending any of these events, what's the best way to connect with you?
Yeah, so our website is www.sacredearthwarriors.com.
Excellent. Well, Maria, I feel like I could talk to you all night, but I know you've got things to do, and so do the listeners. So I won't put you through that. But what I might do is bring you back sometime. And it has been such a pleasure to have you on the show. I so appreciate you, especially getting the opportunity to do it here in person with you. And you talked about moving to LA. That's a part of my plan. I'm about 45 minutes outside of LA, for those of you who don't know. And part of my plan is to relocate the Positive Head studio up there just so I can do more of this, because it's so nice to be able to look across and look someone in the eye when you're talking to them, as opposed to, just hearing them on the other end of, the computer or phone or what have you. So, I will leave you with one question. It's a question I would always start with the same question, end with the same question. 60 seconds or less. What is the meaning of life according to Maria Teresa Chavez?
The meaning of life to me is to grow, is to evolve, is to remember who we are, is to positively impact each other, and just remember that we are love, we are light. Fear is not real. It's something that is made up in our minds, and we're just completely unlimited. There's nothing that we cannot imagine, believe, and ultimately do.
Beautiful. False emotions appearing real. That's your fear, right? Thank you so much again, Maria. Such a pleasure. I very much appreciate you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, everyone, that concludes this week's interview episode. If you have enjoyed this positive download from our hearts and minds to yours, please take a minute, give us a rating or review on iTunes. Since iTunes is the holy grail of all things podcasting, your good reviews help us to reach more listeners. Also, we would be extremely appreciative if you would tell your friends and family about the show. Our sincere intent with the Positive Head podcast is to spread positivity to the world because we're selfish, quite honestly. I say that jokingly, but really only halfway joking. I'm referring to the good kind of selfish based on the knowing that we all get what we give in this life, because when we give, we're actually always giving to extensions of self, since we're all really one in the same consciousness, just in different bodies. So if you want to be a good selfish along with us by helping to spread the positivity, by all means, please proceed to shout about the Positive Head podcast from your rooftop. Otherwise, as you continue on your fabulous journey in this 3D reality, be sure to remember this. As long as you ain't dead, you're already positive ahead. Journey well, everyone, and thank you for being.